The rejection ceremony ended with silence, the kind that presses against your chest until breathing becomes a conscious effort. I stood at the edge of the pack gathering, watching couples claim each other under the harvest moon, their bonds snapping into place like stars finding their constellations. My wolf whimpered somewhere deep inside me, a sound I'd learned to muffle over the years. Isla. My father's voice carried across the clearing, heavy with something between pity and relief. Come here. I walked toward him, my boots crunching over fallen leaves that smelled of decay and approaching winter. The pack members parted as I passed, their eyes sliding away from mine. I'd grown accustomed to being looked through rather than at. At 23, I was the oldest unmated Omega in the Riverside Pack's recorded history, a curiosity that had curdled into embarrassment for everyone involved. My father stood beside Elder Miriam, whose silver hair caught the moonlight like spider silk. In her gnarled hands, she held a sealed envelope the color of old parchment. Your grandmother's estate has been settled, Elder Miriam said, her voice like wind through hollow trees. She pressed the envelope into my hands, and I felt the weight of keys inside. The cabin on Frost Peak Mountain. It's yours now. I stared at the envelope, confusion threading through my exhaustion. Grandmother Iris had a cabin? She left strict instructions. My father interrupted, his jaw tight. The property passes to you, and you alone. No one else from the family may claim it. He wouldn't meet my eyes. She was always particular about such things. The way he said it made something old and bitter twist in my stomach. Grandmother Iris had died 3 months ago, and I'd been forbidden from attending her funeral. Pack business, my mother had said, though we both knew the truth. I embarrassed them. A broken Omega with no mate, no purpose, no place in the careful hierarchy they'd built. The cabin's been closed for 40 years, Elder Miriam continued, studying my face with an intensity that made my skin prickle. Your grandmother was the last to live there. She left before you were born and never returned. She leaned closer, and I caught the scent of sage and something sharper. Warning. There are conditions. You must go alone. You must stay 3 full nights. And you must not open the cellar door until the 3rd night, when the moon is dark. That's absurd, my father snapped. She's an Omega. Alone on that mountain with winter coming. It's what Iris demanded, Elder Miriam cut him off, her authority absolute. Honor her wishes, or forfeit the inheritance entirely. Those were her terms. I looked down at the envelope in my hands, feeling the solid weight of the keys. Somewhere deep in my chest, something shifted. Not my wolf, exactly, but something older. A pull, like a tide responding to a moon I couldn't see. I'll go, I heard myself say. My father's face darkened. Isla, be reasonable. I'll go, I repeated, louder this time. Around us, conversations had stopped. The pack was listening now, their attention sharp and sudden. When do I leave? Elder Miriam smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Tomorrow at dawn. The mountain doesn't wait for second thoughts. I left before sunrise, my truck loaded with supplies I could barely afford. The Riverside Pack lands fell away behind me as I drove north, the road narrowing to a ribbon of cracked asphalt that wound higher into the mountains. Pine trees pressed close on either side, their branches heavy with the promise of early snow. No one had come to see me off, no one except Thomas, my younger brother, who'd pressed a satellite phone into my hands with shaking fingers. Just in case, he'd whispered, glancing over his shoulder. Don't tell Dad I gave you this. The memory of his worry followed me up the mountain like a ghost. The road to Frost Peak hadn't been maintained in decades. Twice I had to stop and clear fallen branches, my breath fogging in the October air that tasted of ice and stone. By the time the cabin came into view, the sun had climbed to its apex, though shadows still clung to the valley below like pooled ink. The cabin was larger than I'd expected. 2 stories of dark timber and river stone, with a steep roof designed to shed heavy snow. Windows like closed eyes stared out over the mountainside. The forest had tried to reclaim it, sending creeping vines up the walls and roots across the stone pathway, but something had held them back. A perimeter of clear ground surrounded the structure, as if nature itself had agreed to keep its distance. I killed the engine and sat for a moment in the sudden silence, my hands tight on the steering wheel. The pull I'd felt last night was stronger here, a resonance in my bones that made my wolf stir restlessly. The keys were cold in my palm as I approached the front door, 3 of them on a tarnished ring. 1 brass, 1 iron, one that looked like silver but felt wrong somehow, too heavy, too warm. The brass key fit the front door's lock with a click that echoed like breaking ice. The door swung inward on hinges that shouldn't have been silent after 40 years of disuse. The interior smelled of cedar and something else, herbs I couldn't name, and underneath it all, a scent that made my wolf's ears prick forward. Not decay, not abandonment. Something alive and waiting. The main room was exactly as someone had left it. Furniture arranged around a riverstone fireplace, books on shelves, a kitchen area with iron pots hanging from ceiling hooks. Dust should have coated everything, but the surfaces were merely dim, as if cleaned by hands more regular than time should allow. I set my bags down slowly, every sense on alert. A grandfather clock stood in the corner, its pendulum still. When I checked my phone, I had no signal. I expected this deep in the mountains. The satellite phone Thomas gave me remained my only connection to the world below. I spent the first hour exploring the ground floor, my footsteps creaking on wide floorboards that had been laid with precision. The cabin held traces of my grandmother everywhere, her handwriting on the spines of journals, her scent faint but present in the fabric of curtains, her choice in the arrangement of dried flowers that somehow hadn't crumbled to dust. But it was the door that held my attention. In the kitchen, set into the floor near the back wall, a cellar door waited beneath a faded rug. Iron hinges, a heavy bolt, and carved into the wood in letters that had been burned deep, 3rd night only. I crouched beside it, my fingers hovering over the bolt. The wood was cold, unnaturally so, as if winter lived beneath it regardless of season. My wolf whined, torn between curiosity and instinct. Elder Miriam's words echoed in my memory. You must not open the cellar door until the 3rd night, when the moon is dark. I pulled the rug back over the door and stood, my heart beating harder than it should. The sun was setting when I finally climbed the stairs to the 2nd floor, 2 bedrooms, both preserved as if their occupants had simply stepped out for the evening. I chose the smaller one, where a window looked east over the valley. From here, I could see the forest rolling away like a frozen sea, and beyond it, the distant lights of towns I'd never visited. I was truly alone for the first time in my life. The thought should have terrified me. Instead, it settled over my shoulders like a coat I'd been waiting to wear. Heavy, yes, but mine. I unpacked my clothes, built a fire in the bedroom's small hearth, and tried to eat the sandwich I'd brought. It tasted like cardboard, my appetite stolen by the strangeness of this place. Outside, night fell fast and complete, the kind of darkness that only exists far from civilization. I was preparing for bed when I heard it. Footsteps on the floor below, slow, deliberate. Moving through the main room toward the kitchen. My wolf surged forward, every protective instinct flaring. I grabbed the iron poker from beside the hearth and crept toward the bedroom door, my bare feet silent on the floorboards. My heart hammered against my ribs. The footsteps stopped. Then, from directly below me, a voice. Male, deep, and edged with something that might have been pain, or might have been warning. You shouldn't have come here, little Omega. The floorboards beneath my feet suddenly felt very thin. I didn't sleep that night. I sat with my back against the bedroom door, the iron poker across my lap, listening to the silence that had swallowed the voice whole. Hours passed. The fire burned down to embers, then ash. My wolf paced restlessly inside me, caught between the urge to flee and something else, something that whispered the voice hadn't felt like a threat, not exactly. When dawn finally bled gray light through the window, I was exhausted and wired in equal measure. I'd heard nothing else after those words. No more footsteps, no doors opening or closing, just the settling creaks of an old house and the wind moving through the pines outside. I descended the stairs as the sun rose, the poker still in my hand, every muscle tense. The main room looked exactly as I'd left it. Kitchen undisturbed, The rug over the cellar door hadn't moved. I checked the front door, still locked from the inside, the bolt I'd thrown last night firmly in place. The windows were latched, no broken glass, no signs of entry, but on the kitchen table, where I knew nothing had been before, sat a clay mug filled with water so cold it had frost forming on the rim. My hands trembled as I touched it. The ceramic was freezing, and when I lifted the mug, I found a wet ring beneath it. Proof that something, had placed it there recently. The water inside looked crystal clear, almost luminescent in the morning light. I set the mug down carefully and backed away, my breath coming faster. "Hello?" My voice sounded small in the empty cabin. "I know you're here. Show yourself." Nothing. Just the ticking I suddenly realized was coming from the grandfather clock, though its pendulum still hung motionless. I spent that day trying to rationalize what had happened. Maybe I'd sleepwalked. Maybe the isolation was already getting to me. Stress and exhaustion creating auditory hallucinations. I'd read about that. How loneliness could make the mind conjure companions from nothing. But the mug remained on the table, real and cold, and impossible to explain away. I tried the satellite phone. Thomas answered on the third ring, his voice tinny and distant. "Isla, thank God. How is it up there?" "Strange," I said, watching my breath fog in the kitchen despite the fire I'd built. "Have you ever heard stories about grandmother's cabin? About anything unusual?" A long pause. "Dad doesn't like us talking about Grandmother Iris. You know that. Says she had strange ideas, that she practiced old ways the pack had moved beyond." His voice dropped lower. "Why? What's happened?" I almost told him about the voice, the mug, the unnatural cold. But something stopped me, the same instinct that had kept me quiet through years of rejection and disappointment, the knowledge that speaking certain truths aloud only invited more pain. "Nothing," I lied. "Just adjusting. I'll call you tomorrow." After I hung up, I forced myself to explore the property outside. The day was bright and cold, the sky that particular shade of blue that only exists at high altitude. The perimeter of clear ground around the cabin was even more obvious in daylight. A perfect circle where nothing grew, bounded by forests so dense it seemed to lean inward, watching. I found a well with an iron pump behind the cabin, still functioning. A woodshed stacked with logs cut to precise lengths, a root cellar separate from the house, filled with preserved foods in jars that shouldn't have lasted 40 years, but showed no signs of spoilage, and everywhere, carved into trees at the forest's edge, I found symbols. Not random marks, but deliberate patterns, circles within circles, spirals, crescents, and something that looked like a wolf's print overlaid with a 5-pointed star. They'd been cut deep into the bark, some so old the trees had tried to heal around them, creating raised scars in the wood. My grandmother had marked the boundary. But marked it against what? The sun was setting when I returned to the cabin. My arms full of firewood. The temperature had dropped sharply, and I could see my breath in white clouds. I built up the fires in both the main room and bedroom hearths, made myself eat canned soup that tasted like tin and salt, and tried not to watch the cellar door. Third night only. Tomorrow night. Tomorrow night I would see what my grandmother had hidden beneath the cabin, what she'd guarded with warnings, and waited 40 years for the right person to discover. Why me? Why had she left this place to the granddaughter who'd been rejected by her own pack, the Omega too broken to find a mate, the embarrassment the family barely acknowledged? I was sitting by the fire, these thoughts circling like ravens, when the temperature plummeted. One moment the room was warm, crackling with firelight. The next, frost began forming on the windows in fractal patterns that grew as I watched. The flames in the hearth turned blue at their base, guttering as if starved of oxygen. And then he was there, not walking through a door, not emerging from shadows, simply there, standing between me and the kitchen, as if he'd always existed in that spot, and I was only now capable of seeing him. He was tall, over 6 feet, with shoulders that spoke of strength and violence in equal measure. Dark hair fell to his collar, and his eyes. God, his eyes were the color of winter ice, pale and burning at once. He wore clothes from another era, rough wool pants, A shirt that might have been white once. Boots that had walked through decades, but it was the way he looked at me that froze me in place. Not with hostility, though wariness edged his posture. Not with hunger, though something intense moved behind that glacial gaze. He looked at me like I was a puzzle he'd been trying to solve for a very long time. "You have her face," he said, his voice the same one from last night, deep and edged with something raw. Iris's face when she was young. Before, he didn't finish. His form flickered slightly, like heat waves rising from summer pavement. And I understood with a jolt that sent ice through my veins. He wasn't entirely solid. Wasn't entirely real. "You're a ghost," I whispered. His mouth twisted. Not quite a smile, not quite a grimace. "Is that what you think? That I'm dead? What else could you be?" He moved closer, and the temperature dropped further. Frost crept across the floorboards from where he stood. "I'm bound, trapped, cursed if you prefer dramatic terms." He stopped a few feet away, studying me with an intensity that made my wolf press forward, curious, despite our fear. "Iris bound me here 70 years ago. Bound me and left me and promised she'd return with the key to breaking it. But she never came back. 70 years. The math didn't work. My grandmother had only been gone 40 years, and she'd been in her 80s when she died, which meant—" "She bound you when she was young," I said slowly. "Before she left the mountain. Before she left me," he corrected, and the bitterness in his voice was sharp enough to cut. "We were supposed to face the consequences together. Instead, she ran, and I've been here ever since, watching seasons turn, watching the forest grow and die and grow again, unable to leave this cursed plot of ground." My mind raced. "What did you do? What consequences?" His eyes flashed, and for a moment his form solidified. I could see the texture of his shirt, the day's growth of beard on his jaw, the way his hands clenched at his sides. "That's not your concern. You should leave. Go back to your pack and forget this place exists." "I can't," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "I have to stay 3 nights. Those were the conditions." Something dangerous crossed his face. "She planned this. Even from the grave, she's manipulating everything." He took another step closer, and I felt the cold radiating from him like a physical presence. "Do you know what happens on the 3rd night? Do you understand what she's asked you to do?" I shook my head. "The cellar," he said quietly. "She told you not to open it until then, didn't she? The dark moon, when the barrier is thinnest." His laugh was hollow. "She's not giving you an inheritance, little Omega. She's giving you a choice, and either way you choose, someone pays the price." Before I could respond, before I could ask what he meant, he disappeared. Not fading gradually, but vanishing between one heartbeat and the next, taking the unnatural cold with him. The fire roared back to full strength. The frost on the windows began to melt, running down the glass like tears. I sat there shaking, not from cold, but from the weight of understanding I didn't want. My grandmother hadn't left me this cabin as a gift. She'd left me a responsibility. A secret, a sentence that had been waiting 70 years to be carried out or overturned. And I had less than 24 hours to decide which. The second night, I didn't even pretend I would sleep. I sat at the kitchen table with every lamp lit, surrounded by my grandmother's journals that I'd pulled from the shelves. Her handwriting covered page after page. Tight, precise script that documented years of life on this mountain. Most of it was mundane, weather patterns, recipes, observations about wildlife. But interspersed throughout were other entries, written in a language I didn't recognize. The symbols matched those carved into the boundary trees, and beside them, my grandmother had made notes in English. The binding holds 7 decades, 7 sacrifices, 7 renewals. But I am tired. So tired. He calls to me in dreams, still angry, still beautiful, still believing I betrayed him rather than saved him. When the time comes, let her choose freely. Let her see him as I first did, not monster, not myth, but man. Let her decide if mercy or justice serves the greater good. My hands trembled as I turned the pages. Grandmother Iris had been 20 when she'd performed the binding. The year was 1955, and she'd written about meeting someone at a pack gathering, someone who didn't belong, who'd come from the Northern Territories where the old ways still held power. His name is Ash, she'd written, and he is the most dangerous creature I've ever encountered. Also the loneliest. Ash. The ghost, the bound man, had a name. I kept reading, piecing together a story from fragments and careful omissions. Iris and Ash had been lovers, meeting in secret throughout that summer. But something had gone wrong, something involving pack politics, territorial disputes, and a death that Iris claimed was an accident, but others called murder. The pack had demanded Ash's execution. Iris had refused to let them have him. So she'd done something else, something that required ancient magic and terrible cost. She'd bound him to the mountain, frozen him between life and death, protecting him from the pack's vengeance but imprisoning him in the process. Then she'd fled, taking the secret with her, taking the key that could release him. I was pregnant. She'd written in an entry dated 3 months after the binding. I couldn't tell him, couldn't stay. The pack would have known the child was his, and they would have destroyed us both. So I ran, and I lived, and I raised my daughter far from here. And I have never stopped hearing him call my name in the dark. My grandmother had a daughter, my mother, who'd grown up never knowing her father was trapped on a frozen mountain, bound by her mother's desperate magic. My mother, who'd forbidden me from attending Iris's funeral, who'd looked at me with something like guilt my entire life. Did she know? Had Grandmother Iris told her the truth before she died? I was staring at the journal, trying to process this, when the cellar door rattled, not the subtle settling of old wood. A deliberate, violent shake, as if something beneath was trying to break free. The bolt held, but the entire door frame groaned with strain. Then Ash was there again, manifesting beside me with such suddenness that I yelped and knocked the journal to the floor. "Don't," he said, his voice urgent. "Don't go down there tomorrow night. Whatever she told you, whatever you think you'll find, it's not worth it." I stood, my chair scraping back. "What's in the cellar?" "The anchor," he said. "The physical manifestation of the binding. Destroy it, and I go free. But there's a cost, Omega. There's always a cost with magic this old." "What cost?" He looked at me, and for the first time I saw past the anger and bitterness to something rawer underneath. Fear. Not for himself. For me. The binding required a sacrifice to create it. It requires a sacrifice to break it. Iris knew that. She knew, and she sent you here anyway. To the granddaughter she never met, the Omega her pack rejected. His form flickered, losing solidity. She's offering you to the magic, one life to free another. That's the choice. The floor seemed to tilt beneath me. "No. That's not... She wouldn't she?" His laugh was bitter. "She left me here for 70 years. Do you really think she valued life as much as you want to believe?" I sank back into the chair, my mind reeling. But even as horror washed through me, another thought surfaced. Smaller, quieter, but insistent. Then why did she wait? Why not make this choice herself? "You're lying," I said slowly. "If it only required a life, she could have offered her own. She could have freed you decades ago." Ash went very still. "What?" "She lived with the guilt for 70 years. If the solution was that simple, she would have taken it." I stood again, meeting his eyes. "What aren't you telling me?" For a long moment he said nothing. Then, so quietly I almost missed it. "She couldn't break it herself. The magic required someone of her bloodline, but someone who wasn't responsible for the binding. Someone innocent of the original sin." His jaw clenched. "She needed an heir, and she needed that heir to choose freely, to willingly take on the burden or refuse it. That's how old magic works. It cannot be forced. So tomorrow night, you go into the cellar, you see the anchor, and you decide, break it and pay the price, or leave it intact and let me remain here until this mountain crumbles to dust." He moved closer, and I could feel the cold rolling off him like fog. "But understand this, Isla, Iris's granddaughter, unwanted Omega, rejected and alone. If you free me, the magic will take what it's owed, and I don't know if you'll survive it." He said my name. He knew my name. "How do you—" "I've been trapped here for 70 years, he said softly. but I'm not cut off from the world entirely. I hear things, feel things. I felt when Iris died 3 months ago. Felt the binding shudder as her blood connection weakened. And I've felt you since the moment you crossed the mountain boundary. Your wolf, your heart, your fear. His eyes held mine. I know you, Isla. Maybe better than anyone in your pack ever bothered to. The words hit like a physical blow, cracking something open in my chest that I'd kept sealed for years. Before I could respond, he vanished again. I was alone in the kitchen, the cellar door silent beneath its rug, the journals spread around me like evidence at a crime scene. Tomorrow was the third night, the dark moon, the moment of choice, and I had no idea what I was going to do. I woke on the third morning to snow. It fell in thick curtains outside the window, transforming the world into something hushed and unreal. I hadn't meant to sleep, had fought against it actually, but sometime before dawn, exhaustion had won. Now pale light filtered through the storm, and I could barely see the tree line through the white. My body ached as I dressed, my wolf restless and anxious beneath my skin. Today. Tonight. The choice that had been building since the moment I'd arrived would finally come due. I made coffee on the old stove, the routine movements grounding me. My hands were steadier than they should have been, and I wondered distantly if I was in shock, or if some part of me had already decided what I was going to do, even if my conscious mind hadn't caught up yet. The journals were still spread across the table where I'd left them. I picked up the last one, the entries from just before my grandmother had fled the mountain, and read the final page again. If you're reading this, granddaughter, then I am gone, and you have come in my place. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I never knew you, never held you, never told you the truth about your bloodline. I'm sorry I left you this burden, but I also believe you are stronger than I ever was. Iris's line has always produced daughters of exceptional will, even when the world tried to break them. Especially then. Ash will tell you that freeing him requires your death. He believes this because that is what the old magic typically demands. Life for life, blood for blood, and he will try to convince you to leave, to abandon him, because despite everything, he is not cruel. He never was. But there is another way. I discovered it too late, when I was already old, and the chance had passed. The magic requires sacrifice, yes, but not death. Never death, though death is easier and cleaner and what the old rituals always assumed. What it requires is transformation, a willing surrender of one life to step into another, a choice made freely to bind yourself to the mountain, to the magic, to him. Not as prisoner, but as guardian. 2 souls to share the burden I placed on one. The anchor in the cellar is not just his prison. It is the heart of something older, something that keeps the darkness in the deep valleys at bay, something that has protected these mountains for centuries. I trapped Ash there because he was the only one strong enough to hold it. But I never meant for him to bear it alone forever. If you go to him tonight, if you choose to break the anchor, the magic will try to take you. But if you choose instead to join him, to accept the binding willingly, to become guardian alongside him, the magic will transform rather than destroy. You will no longer be fully Omega, no longer be fully mortal. You will be something between, something the old world understood but ours has forgotten. And you will be bound to Frost Peak until you and Ash together find someone else worthy to take your places. I know what I'm asking. I know how it sounds. A grandmother you never met, demanding you give up the life you know for a man you just encountered, for magic you don't believe in, for a duty that was never supposed to be yours. But I also know what you've lived through. The rejection, the loneliness, the sense that you were always meant for something else, something your pack couldn't see or understand. I know because I felt it too, before I came to this mountain, before I met Ash and learned what I really was. Omega doesn't mean weak, granddaughter. It never did. It means bridge. It means balance. It means the one who can walk between worlds that would destroy anyone else. Choose freely. Choose for yourself, not for me, not for him, not for some abstract duty, and know that whatever you decide, I am proud of you. I wish I could have told you that in person. With love across the years, Iris. I set the journal down with shaking hands. The coffee had gone cold while I read. And outside, the snow continued to fall, burying the world deeper. Bridge. Balance. The words resonated with something in my chest that had been dormant my entire life. I thought about my pack, about the rejection ceremony, about the way people had looked through me as if I didn't exist. I thought about my mother's careful distance, my father's embarrassment, the way even Thomas's kindness came with an edge of pity. What was I going back to? What life waited for me down the mountain that was worth more than this? Worth more than the possibility of finally mattering. But that was emotional thinking, and this decision deserved more. I forced myself to consider it rationally, turning it over like a stone to examine every facet. If I walked away, Ash would remain trapped. He'd spend another 70 years alone, then another, until eventually even ghosts learned how to stop feeling. The mountain would keep its guardian, but at what cost? And who would my grandmother leave the next choice to? Another unwanted granddaughter? Another rejected Omega? Another woman the world had decided wasn't good enough? If I tried to break the anchor without accepting the binding, I might die. Probably would die, despite my grandmother's reassurances. Old magic didn't bend easily, and I was just one person with no training, no power, nothing but desperation and the thin thread of bloodline connection. But if I accepted, if I chose transformation over destruction, binding over freedom, I would never be normal, never have the quiet life I'd sometimes dreamed of, the little house in a small town where no one knew I was Omega, where I could just be Isla, without all the weight that name carried in Packlands. I would be tied to this mountain, to its magic, to Ash. I would be guardian of something I didn't fully understand, responsible for keeping darkness at bay, whatever that meant. I would be changed fundamentally, irrevocably, into something that wasn't quite human anymore. The old Isla, the one who'd stood at that rejection ceremony watching everyone else find their place, would have been terrified, would have run. But I wasn't entirely her anymore. Something had shifted the moment I'd crossed onto Frost Peak. Something had woken up. I spent the day preparing. I cleaned the cabin thoroughly, though it didn't need it. Some instinct said that what I was about to do required order, intention, respect. I bathed in water heated over the fire, washing away 3 days of fear and uncertainty. I dressed in clean clothes, simple jeans and a sweater the color of pine needles, my pale hair braided down my back. I ate even though I wasn't hungry, forcing down bread and cheese and dried fruit. My body would need strength for what was coming. And as the gray afternoon dimmed toward evening, as the snow finally stopped and a strange stillness settled over the mountain, I pulled back the rug and stared at the cellar door. The bolt was cold under my fingers. The iron had turned white with frost, and my breath fogged in the air despite the fires I'd built. My wolf pressed forward, alert, but not afraid, curious even about what lay below. I thought about calling Thomas one last time, saying goodbye to the only person in my family who'd ever shown me genuine kindness. But what would I say? How could I explain this in a way that made sense? Instead, I pulled the bolt free. The door opened easily, revealing stairs that descended into darkness. Cold air rushed up, carrying scents of earth and stone and something else. Something that made my wolf's hackles rise and her tail lift in challenge or greeting. I couldn't tell which. At the bottom of the stairs, light flickered. Not firelight. Something bluer, colder, like moonlight trapped underwater. I descended slowly, one hand on the rough stone wall for balance. 12 steps. 13. 14. The numbers felt important somehow, weighted with significance I didn't understand. The cellar was larger than the cabin's footprint should have allowed. A cavern carved into living rock, its ceiling lost in shadows. And in the center, growing up from the stone floor like a tree made of ice and light, stood the anchor. It was beautiful in a terrible way. Crystalline formations spiraled upward, branching and reconnecting in patterns that hurt to follow. Inside the crystal I could see things frozen. Flowers that had bloomed and died decades ago, leaves from trees that no longer existed, and at the very heart, a man. Not a ghost. Not a shadow. Ash himself, suspended in the crystal's core, his eyes closed and his expression peaceful. He looked younger here, the bitterness and anger stripped away. And I could see what my grandmother must have seen 70 years ago. The strong bones of his face, the capable hands, the way even frozen and trapped he seemed to radiate quiet strength. He was beautiful. And he was waiting. I was wondering if you'd actually come down here. I spun around. Ash stood at the base of the stairs. His ghost form, the one I'd been talking to, watching me with those ice-pale eyes. I thought you were... I gestured at the anchor, at his frozen form. That's my body, he said quietly. This is what's left of my consciousness, bound to the mountain but not trapped as completely. He moved closer, and I noticed that down here he seemed more solid, more real. The anchor holds my physical form in stasis. Break it, and either I wake or I die. There's no way to know which until it's done. I turned back to the crystal, studying it. Up close, I could see veins of darker color running through it. Not black exactly, but the deep purple red of bruises, of old blood. My grandmother said there's another way, that I can join the binding instead of breaking it. She told you that? Something raw crossed his face. Of course she did. One last manipulation. It's not manipulation if she's giving me the truth, I said. Surprised by my own certainty, she explained the cost. She explained what I'd become. She gave me the choice. And what do you choose, little Omega? His voice was soft, dangerous. Do you walk away and leave me here? Do you try to break it and risk your life? Or do you believe a dead woman's promises and bind yourself to a mountain? To magic? To me? Someone you've known for 3 days? I looked at him. Really looked at him. Past the bitterness and the anger to the loneliness underneath. 70 years of isolation. 70 years of watching seasons change through a prison of crystal and magic. 70 years of hoping someone would come, that Iris would return, that he wouldn't be forgotten completely. I knew that loneliness. Had lived it in my own way, surrounded by pack but never belonging, always watching from the outside. I choose transformation, I said. The words fell into the cavern like stones into deep water. Ash went very still. You don't know what you're saying. I do. I moved toward the anchor, toward his frozen form. I've spent 23 years being what other people needed me to be. Quiet, small, forgettable. And where did it get me? Rejected. Pitied. Sent away to deal with a family embarrassment. I placed my palm against the crystal, and it hummed under my touch, responding to something in my blood. My grandmother said Omega means bridge, means balance. I'm done being neither one thing nor another, never quite fitting anywhere. If I'm going to be between worlds, I choose to do it with purpose. You'll be bound here, Ash said, and I heard desperation creeping into his voice. You'll give up any chance at a normal life. At finding your mate, having children, growing old, surrounded by pack. I was rejected by every potential mate, I reminded him. My pack barely acknowledges I exist. And normal? I laughed, the sound echoing off stone. I've never been normal. I've been waiting my entire life to discover what I actually am instead of what I'm not. I turned to face him fully. My grandmother loved you. She made terrible choices trying to save you. But she loved you. And she sent me here because she believed I could do what she couldn't. Share this burden. Balance it. Make it something bearable instead of a prison sentence. I took a breath. So yes, I choose the binding. I choose to stay. Why? The word was nearly a whisper. Give me one reason that's about you. Not duty or guilt or proving something to people who never valued you. I thought about it. Really thought about it. And when the answer came, it was simpler than I expected, because for the first time in my life, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. The truth of it settled in my bones. This mountain, this magic, this strange half-real man who looked at me like I mattered, it felt right, in a way nothing ever had before. Ash closed his eyes. When he opened them again, something had shifted in his expression. Not quite hope, not quite resignation, something between. It will hurt, he warned. The magic will unmake you and remake you. Everything you are will be torn apart and put back together differently. I know. You'll be tied to me. Our lives linked. You'll feel what I feel. Know what I know. There'll be no privacy, no separation. I know. And if you regret it, if you wake tomorrow and realize you've made a terrible mistake, there's no going back. The binding is permanent. I smiled, and it felt strange on my face. Not because it was forced, but because it was genuine. The first real smile I'd worn in longer than I could remember. Then I guess you'd better be good company. For the first time since I'd met him, Ash laughed. It was rusty, unpracticed, but real. Tell me what to do, I said. He moved to stand beside me, both of us facing the anchor. Put both hands on the crystal. Open yourself to it. Your wolf, your heart, everything you are. The magic will recognize your bloodline. Recognize the choice you're making. It will ask you 3 times if you're certain. You must answer yes each time, without hesitation. He paused. And Isla? Thank you. Even if this doesn't work, even if something goes wrong, thank you for choosing to try. I placed both palms against the crystal. It was like touching winter itself. Cold that burned, cold that sank through skin and muscle to freeze marrow. But underneath the cold was something else. A pulse. A rhythm, a heartbeat that had been waiting 70 years for this moment. The magic rose to meet me, and I felt it asking its first question. Not in words, but in sensation, in images that flooded my mind. Are you certain? This choice is binding. This choice is permanent. This choice will transform everything you are. Yes, I said aloud, my voice steady. The magic pushed deeper, showing me what I would become. Something between human and other, Omega and Guardian, mortal and ageless. I would age slowly, if at all. I would be tied to Frost Peak, unable to leave for more than a few days without feeling the pull back. I would sense the darkness in the deep valleys, would feel its movements, would stand against it when it tried to creep higher into the world. Are you certain? This burden is heavy. This duty is endless. This life is not the one you imagined. Yes, I said, and meant it. The crystal began to crack under my hands, hairline fractures spreading like lightning. Inside, Ash's frozen form stirred, just slightly, just enough that I saw his chest move with breath he hadn't taken in 70 years. The magic asked its final question, and this one went deeper than the others, cutting to the core of who I was. Are you certain? You choose this freely, without coercion, without expectation of reward. You choose transformation over comfort, duty over freedom, connection over independence. You choose him, this mountain, this magic, fully and completely. Are you certain? I thought of my pack down the mountain, of the rejection ceremony, of every moment I'd felt invisible or wrong or inadequate. I thought of my grandmother, young and brave and terrified, making impossible choices to save someone she loved. I thought of Ash, trapped and waiting and still kind enough to warn me away, even though he desperately wanted to be free. And I thought of myself, not the Omega everyone had decided I was, but the woman I was choosing to become. Bridge, balance, guardian. Yes, I said for the 3rd time. I'm certain. The anchor shattered. Pain doesn't adequately describe what happened next. It was as if every cell in my body remembered it was made of stardust and tried to return to that state simultaneously. I felt myself fragmenting, dissolving, the boundaries between Isla and everything else becoming permeable, then non-existent. I was the mountain, ancient stone and patient earth, roots driving deep into darkness, peaks scraping the sky. I was the forest, 10,000 trees breathing as one, life and death cycling through seasons without end. I was the snow falling outside, each crystal unique and perfect and temporary. And I was the darkness. It lived in the deepest valleys, in places where sunlight never reached, in caves that descended into the mountain's heart. Not evil exactly, but hungry, ancient, patient. It had been testing the boundaries for centuries, probing for weakness, waiting for the guardian to falter. The magic had held it back, the anchor had held it back, and now I understood what my grandmother had done 70 years ago. She hadn't just imprisoned Ash, she'd bound him to the mountain's defense, made him the living barrier between that darkness and the world above. One person, holding back an ancient tide, alone for 7 decades. The injustice of it burned through me, even as the transformation continued. My wolf howled inside my dissolving consciousness, not in pain but in recognition. This was what we'd been meant for all along. Not to submit to pack hierarchy, not to find our place in someone else's order, but to stand at the boundary and hold the line. Then I felt him. Ash's consciousness crashed into mine like a wave, and suddenly I wasn't alone in the dissolution. His memories flooded through me. Growing up in the northern territories where the old ways still held power, learning to sense magic before he could walk, training to be guardian before he understood what that meant, meeting Iris at a territorial gathering, falling in love over stolen moments that summer, believing they could make it work despite the rules that said guardians didn't take mates. That duty came before everything, the death that had triggered everything. An accident during a hunt, a pack elder who'd fallen badly and broken his neck. Ash had been there, had tried to save him, but the man had died anyway, and the pack, already suspicious of the outsider with strange magic, had called it murder, had demanded execution. Iris, desperate and brilliant and barely 20 years old, had studied every scrap of guardian lore she could find, had discovered the anchor ritual, the binding that could hide him from the pack's vengeance, while still fulfilling his duty to the mountain. Had performed it alone one night while the pack searched the valleys, had trapped him in crystal and magic, and promises she couldn't keep. "I'll find another way," she'd told him, as the crystal closed around his body. "I'll find a way to share the burden so you're not alone. I swear it." But she'd been pregnant, and the pack would have known the child was his, and they would have destroyed them both, so she'd run. Had raised her daughter far from the mountain, had tried to forget while never quite managing it, had spent 70 years searching for the solution she'd finally written in her journals. Too late for her. Just in time for me. I felt Ash's shock as he woke fully, felt his consciousness expand as the binding transformed from prison to partnership. He was in my mind now, as I was in his. Not invasive exactly, but present. I could feel his relief like rain after drought, his disbelief that this was actually working, his sudden fierce protectiveness toward me as he sensed how much the transformation was taking from me. "Hold on," his voice echoed through our shared consciousness. "Don't let go. The magic needs to know you're strong enough to carry this. Fight, Isla. Stay." I tried. God, I tried, but I was so scattered, so fragmented, pieces of myself drifting in directions I couldn't track. My wolf was howling, trying to hold me together through sheer force of will. The mountain was pulling me deeper, trying to absorb me completely into its ancient awareness. Then Ash did something I didn't expect. He pulled me toward him. Not physically. Our bodies were somewhere far away, irrelevant to this space between spaces. But his consciousness wrapped around mine like arms, like shelter, anchoring me to something solid while the transformation raged. He held me together through the worst of it, his presence steady and certain, even when I wanted to stop existing because it would hurt less. "I've got you," he whispered through our bond. "You chose to stay. I won't let you disappear." Time meant nothing in that space. It could have been minutes or hours or days, but gradually, slowly, I felt myself beginning to coalesce. The pieces were coming back together, but not in the same configuration. I was being rebuilt according to a different pattern, a different purpose. When I finally felt solid again, when I finally remembered how to be Isla instead of everything, I opened eyes I didn't remember closing. I was lying on the stone floor of the cellar, my hands still pressed against what remained of the anchor. A few shards of crystal scattered across the ground, their light fading. My body ached like I'd run a marathon and fought a war and survived something that should have killed me. But I was alive, and I was changed. I could feel it immediately, the way my senses had expanded, sharpened. I heard the snow settling on the roof 3 stories above, smelled the particular scent of each type of wood burning in the upstairs fireplaces, felt the mountains slow breathing beneath me, the network of roots and stone and underground rivers that formed its body. And I felt Ash. He was there. Not in my head exactly, but close. Like a room I could step into if I wanted, a presence I could reach for without effort. I knew without looking that his body had emerged from the crystal, that he was whole and real for the first time in 70 years. When I managed to push myself up to sitting, I found him a few feet away, on his knees in the scattered crystal shards. He looked exactly as he had frozen, maybe 30 years old, dark hair falling into his face, those impossible pale eyes wide with something that might have been wonder or shock or relief. But now he was solid, real. His chest rose and fell with breath. Color was returning to his skin. He was becoming human again, or whatever guardians counted as. "You stayed," he said, his voice rough from disuse. "You actually stayed." I managed a weak laugh. "Told you I would." He stared at me for a long moment, then reached out slowly, as if afraid I might vanish. His fingers brushed my cheek, warm now, not cold, and I felt the touch echo through our bond, amplified and strange. "I can feel you," he whispered. "In my mind. Your emotions, your wolf, your heartbeat. Is it like that for you too?" I nodded. It was overwhelming and intimate and terrifying and right all at once. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I know this isn't what you wanted. Stop." I caught his hand, held it against my face. "I chose this. Freely. Remember?" Something shifted in his expression, the last of the bitterness falling away, leaving something raw and open underneath. "Why?" "I still don't understand why you'd give up everything for someone you just met." "Because you're not someone I just met," I said, and realized it was true. Through the bond, I'd absorbed pieces of him, not just memories but the shape of his soul, the way he saw the world, the loneliness that matched my own. "I know you, Ash. Maybe not all the details, but the important parts. And you know me too." He did. I could feel him in my mind, understanding things about me I'd never spoken aloud, the years of rejection, the way I'd learned to make myself small, the quiet, desperate hope that somewhere, someday, I would matter to someone. "You matter to me," he said, answering the thought I hadn't realized I'd projected. "From the moment you crossed the boundary, you mattered. I tried to push you away because I couldn't stand the thought of Iris sacrificing another innocent person to clean up her mess. But you weren't a sacrifice, you were a choice." His thumb traced my cheekbone, the gesture achingly gentle. "Thank you for choosing me, for choosing this." The moment stretched between us, intimate and fragile. Then my stomach growled loudly, breaking the tension. Ash blinked, then laughed. A real laugh this time, not the rusty, bitter sound from before. "When did you last eat?" "This morning. Maybe." I tried to remember. Time had gotten strange. "What day is it?" He stood still the third night, then offered me his hand. "Come on. Let's get you upstairs and fed. We can figure out the rest tomorrow." I let him pull me up, and nearly fell over as dizziness crashed through me. He caught me easily, his arm solid around my waist, and I felt his concern pulse through our bond. "Easy," he murmured. "The transformation takes everything. You need to rest. Let your body adjust to what you've become. What I'd become. Guardian. Something between mortal and other, bound to this mountain and to him for however long this new life lasted. The weight of it should have been crushing. Instead, as Ash helped me up the cellar stairs, I felt something I'd rarely experienced. Certainty. This was right. This was where I belonged. We emerged into the kitchen, and I saw with surprise that the cabin looked different. Not physically. The furniture was the same, the layout unchanged, but I could see the magic now, woven through the walls and floor and ceiling. Protective wards my grandmother had laid decades ago, still functioning. Symbols carved into the beams that strengthened the boundary, a network of intention and power that made the cabin more fortress than home. "You'll start seeing the world differently," Ash said, settling me into a chair. "The magic, the connections, the way everything's alive and aware. It can be overwhelming at first." He moved around the kitchen with surprising familiarity, building up the fire, finding food in the cold box, heating soup in a pot that had probably sat unused for 70 years. I watched him, fascinated by the way he moved, efficient, graceful, comfortable in this space despite the decades frozen. "You remember how to do this," I observed. "Cook, live in a house. You haven't forgotten." "Time passes differently when you're bound," he said, stirring the soup. I was aware of everything, seasons changing, the forest growing, even Iris occasionally when she let her guard down and thought about the mountain. But I couldn't interact with it, couldn't affect anything. It was like being a ghost watching life continue without you. He glanced at me. Until 3 days ago, when I felt someone cross the boundary. Someone with Iris's blood but a different soul. That's when I could finally manifest enough to talk to you. You tried to warn me away. Of course I did. He poured soup into bowls, vegetable and barley, rich and steaming. I didn't want another person trapped here because of Iris's choices. Even if it meant staying frozen forever, I would have preferred that to your death or enslavement. He set a bowl in front of me, then sat across the table with his own. For a moment, we just looked at each other. Two people who'd been alone for so long, now connected in ways neither of us fully understood yet. It's not enslavement, I said quietly. I'm not trapped. I chose this. You chose it knowing almost nothing about what it would mean, he countered, but gently. In a week, a month, a year, you might feel differently. You might resent me for accepting your sacrifice. I ate some soup, letting the warmth spread through me. My body was ravenous, trying to replenish what the transformation had taken. Do you resent me for it? He froze mid-bite. What? You're bound to me now, just as I'm bound to you. Your consciousness is tied to mine. You'll feel my emotions, my fears, my doubts. If I'm suffering, you'll know. I met his eyes. Do you resent me for binding you to someone who might not be strong enough for this? You shattered a 70-year-old binding and survived a transformation that should have killed you, he said flatly. I think you're stronger than you give yourself credit for. That's not an answer. He set down his spoon. No, I don't resent you. I'm in awe of you, and terrified for you, and grateful to you, and... He stopped, something complicated crossing his face. And I've been alone for 7 decades, and suddenly I'm not, and I don't know how to process that yet. The honesty of it hit me square in the chest. Through our bond, I felt his sincerity, his confusion, his cautious hope that maybe this could work, that maybe we could learn to be partners in this duty, rather than just two people chained together by necessity. We'll figure it out, I said. Together. He smiled, small and uncertain, but real, together. We finished eating in comfortable silence. Outside, the snow had started again, and I could feel it now, each flake's descent, the way it layered over the mountain, adding to the deep drifts that would isolate us completely until spring. The cabin was prepared for it, I realized. The root cellar full of preserved food, the woodshed stocked, everything we'd need to survive months of winter. Because Iris had known, had planned for this, had left everything in place for the granddaughter she'd never met but always hoped would come. What do we do now? I asked, setting my empty bowl aside. What does being guardian actually mean on a day-to-day basis? Ash considered the question. We protect the boundary, keep the darkness contained in the deep valleys. The mountain will tell us when something's wrong. You'll feel it as a wrongness, a discordance in the pattern. Sometimes it's small, just the darkness testing the wards. Sometimes it's bigger. How much bigger? In the last 70 years, there have been 3 serious breaches. Times when the darkness found a weak point and tried to push through. His expression darkened. I couldn't leave the cellar, couldn't move, but I could still channel power into the boundary. It nearly killed me each time, holding it back while frozen. With 2 of us, with you able to move freely while I reinforce the wards, it should be manageable. Should be. Not would be. I filed that away as something to worry about later. And between breaches, we live, he said simply. We maintain the cabin, tend the boundary, learn about each other. We figure out how to be guardians together instead of one person carrying everything alone, he paused. Iris's journals probably have more information. She studied the old ways extensively before attempting the binding. If we're lucky, she left instructions. Right. The journals. I'd only read pieces of them, the parts about Ash and the binding. But there were dozens more on the shelves, years of documentation. I stood, intending to start looking through them, and my legs nearly buckled. Ash was there instantly, catching me before I could fall. Enough, he said firmly. The journals can wait. You need to rest. Let your body finish adjusting. Tomorrow we can start planning. Tonight, you sleep. I wanted to argue, wanted to prove I was fine, but exhaustion crashed over me like a wave. He was right. I needed rest. Ash helped me up the stairs to the bedroom I'd been using, then hesitated at the door. Will you be all right alone? The bond is new. Sometimes the first night is disorienting. I could already feel it. The strangeness of sensing another consciousness nearby, the way his emotions bled into mine and vice versa. Will you? I'll manage. But I felt his uncertainty through our connection. His own worry about spending the first night in 70 years outside the crystal suspension, alone with thoughts he'd had too much time to dwell on. Stay, I said impulsively. Not in a weird way, just close, in case either of us needs help adjusting. Relief flooded through the bond. The other bedroom? Sure. I managed a smile. Neighbors. He smiled back, and something warm unfurled in my chest that had nothing to do with the bond and everything to do with the way he looked at me, like I was brave instead of reckless, strong instead of broken. I fell asleep to the sound of him moving in the next room, to the whisper of our bond settling into something almost comfortable, to the mountain breathing beneath us and the snow falling above. For the first time in my life, I fell asleep knowing I wasn't alone. And when the nightmares came, memories of rejection, of being invisible, of never being enough, I felt Ash's consciousness reach through the bond and hold me steady until they passed. I woke to sunlight streaming through frosted windows and the smell of coffee. For a moment I lay there confused, my mind still tangled in the space between sleep and waking. Then memory crashed back. The cellar, the transformation, Ash solid and real across the table from me. The bond humming quietly in the back of my consciousness, telling me he was awake, downstairs, calm. I sat up slowly, testing my body. The bone-deep exhaustion from yesterday had faded, replaced by a strange new energy that felt both foreign and right. My senses were sharper. I could hear the individual logs settling in the fireplace downstairs, smell the subtle differences between the various herbs hanging in the kitchen, feel the mountain's presence like a warm weight around my shoulders. I dressed quickly and went downstairs to find Ash standing at the kitchen window, a mug of coffee in his hands, staring out at the transformed landscape. 3 feet of snow had fallen overnight, turning the world into something pristine and untouched. The morning light made it glow. He turned when he heard me, and something in his expression made my breath catch. Without the bitterness and anger that had armored him before, I could see him clearly. The strong bones of his face. Yes, but also the vulnerability in his eyes. The way he held himself like someone still learning that he was allowed to take up space. How do you feel? He asked. Different. I moved to the stove, pouring coffee from the pot he'd made. Good different, I think, but definitely different. Through the bond, I felt his relief. He'd been worried I'd wake with regret, that the reality of what I'd chosen would hit me in the cold light of day. But standing here in the kitchen with sunlight painting everything gold and the mountain humming contentedly around us, regret was the furthest thing from my mind. I found more of Iris's journals, Ash said, gesturing to a stack on the table. Specifically ones about guardian training. She was thorough, probably more thorough than my own teachers were. He paused. She really did spend 70 years trying to find a way to fix what she'd done. I heard the forgiveness in his voice, the way he was finally letting go of the anger he'd carried for so long. She loved you. I know. He set down his mug. And I loved her. But we were young and stupid and thought love would be enough to overcome everything. We were wrong. He looked at me. I don't want to make the same mistakes with you. This bond, it's intimate, but it's not the same as what Iris and I had. I need you to understand that. I'm not expecting you to love me just because we're connected. The words should have been reassuring. Instead, they stirred something complicated in my chest. What are you expecting? Partnership, he said immediately. Friendship, hopefully. Someone I can trust to watch my back while I watch yours. He hesitated. The bond will make us close. There's no avoiding that. but whatever develops between us beyond duty, it needs to be real. Not just magical compulsion or gratitude or convenience. I understood what he was saying. After 70 years of isolation, he needed to know that anything between us was genuine, chosen, not just the bond-forcing connection where none would naturally exist. Agreed, I said. So we start with partnership. We learn to work together, to trust each other. Everything else, I shrugged. Everything else happens if it happens. Relief washed through the bond. Thank you. We spent that morning going through Iris's journals, learning what being guardian actually meant. The darkness in the deep valleys was ancient, older than human memory, older than the mountains themselves. It wasn't evil in any moral sense, but it was hungry. It fed on fear, on pain, on the kind of despair that opened holes in a person's soul. Left unchecked, it would creep higher into the populated valleys, finding vulnerable people and hollowing them out from the inside. The Guardian's job was to maintain the boundary wards, to sense when the darkness was testing them, to reinforce weak points before they became breaches. It required constant vigilance and a particular kind of strength. Not physical power exactly, but spiritual resilience. The ability to face the darkness without letting it consume you. Omegas make the best guardians, Ash explained, tapping one of Iris's diagrams. Something about the way your energy works. You can absorb pressure without breaking, redirect force instead of trying to overpower it. The old Guardians were almost all Omegas, before the packs forgot what that designation really meant. I thought about my pack, about the way they'd treated Omega status as something weak, something shameful. How different would my life have been if I'd grown up knowing what I actually was? Not broken, but built for a specific purpose. Don't dwell on it, Ash said quietly, feeling my thoughts through the bond. They didn't know. Most modern packs have forgotten the old ways entirely. They've built hierarchies based on dominance and submission, but they've lost the understanding that every designation has its purpose, its power. You're not Omega, I observed. What does that mean for you as Guardian? I'm what the old traditions called a bridge walker. Someone who can move between the physical and spiritual realms without losing themselves. Different tool for the same job. He smiled slightly. We complement each other, actually. Your Omega nature grounds the magic, keeps it stable. My abilities let me reach into the deeper levels where the darkness lives. Together, we're balanced in a way a single Guardian never could be. The word again. Balance. It seemed to be the theme of everything happening to me. We spent the afternoon outside, Ash showing me the boundary wards carved into trees around the property's perimeter. They needed to be renewed monthly. The symbols recut to keep them fresh and charged with intention. It was meditative work, and I found myself falling into a rhythm. The bite of the knife into bark, the smell of fresh cut wood, the mountain's approval humming through our bond as the wards strengthened. You're a natural at this, Ash said, watching me complete a particularly complex symbol. It took me months to get the feel for it. You're doing it instinctively. Maybe it's the bond, I suggested. I can feel what you know. It's like having access to your memories, your training. It works both ways, he reminded me. I can feel your emotions, your fears, your hopes. There's no hiding from each other, Isla. Not anymore. The intimacy of it should have been frightening. Instead, it felt like relief. I'd spent so long hiding, making myself small and invisible, having someone see me completely, flaws and fears and all, and not flinch away. I'm not flinching, Ash said softly, responding to the thought I hadn't meant to project. I see you. All of you. And I'm not going anywhere. Something tight in my chest loosened. I set down the knife and turned to face him fully. This is weird, right? The way we can feel each other's emotions. The way thoughts just bleed through? Extremely weird, he agreed, but he was smiling. But also, not terrible. Not terrible, I echoed, and found myself smiling back. We returned to the cabin as the sun set, both of us tired but satisfied with the day's work. The boundary was stronger now, reinforced by both of us working in tandem. I could feel the difference, the way the wards hummed with renewed power. the way the darkness in the valleys seemed to pull back slightly, respecting the barrier. Over dinner, venison stew that Ash made from supplies in the root cellar, we talked about smaller things. He asked about my pack, and I told him stories about Thomas, about the few bright moments in an otherwise lonely childhood. I asked about the Northern Territories, and he described a place where magic was still acknowledged, where guardians were honored rather than forgotten. Do they still exist? I asked. The Northern Territories? Could we visit? Ash hesitated. They exist, but they're complicated. The guardians there never forgave Iris for what she did, taking their trained bridgewalker and binding him to a mountain without their permission. They might see you as Iris's heir and treat you accordingly. Meaning they might be hostile, or they might be curious. It's hard to predict. He set down his fork. But we can't leave anyway, not for long. The boundary needs constant attention, especially in the first few years of a new guardian partnership. Maybe someday, when we're more established, we could make a brief trip, but not yet. I tried not to let the disappointment show, but of course he felt it through the bond. I'm not going to apologize for wanting to see more of the world, I said. I've been stuck in one place my whole life. The idea of being stuck somewhere else, even somewhere I chose, is claustrophobic, he finished. I know. I felt it for 70 years. He reached across the table, his hand covering mine. But this is different. You're not frozen. You're not trapped alone. And there's more freedom than you think. We can go down the mountain for short periods, a few days at most. Visit towns, see things. We just have to be careful not to stay away too long or go too far. The touch of his hand sent warmth through me that had nothing to do with the bond. I'd noticed it happening more often, moments where attraction sparked independent of our magical connection. The way he moved, the competence in everything he did, the kindness that showed through now that the bitterness had burned away. I pulled my hand back carefully, not wanting him to feel rejected, but needing space to process what I was feeling. This was too new, too fast. We'd agreed to start with partnership, and I meant to honor that. But God, it was hard when he looked at me like I was something precious. That night, I lay in bed listening to Ash move around in the next room, feeling the echo of his presence through our bond. He was reading one of Iris's journals, his mind turning over the information, occasionally brushing against mine when he found something particularly interesting. I should have found it invasive. Instead, I found it comforting. For the first time in my life, I wasn't alone with my thoughts. Are you still awake? His voice in my mind was tentative, like he was testing whether mental communication was acceptable. Yes. Is this how guardians usually communicate? Sometimes. It's useful when we need to coordinate but can't speak aloud. You'll get better at shielding your thoughts over time. Right now, the bond is new and everything bleeds through, but eventually you'll learn to keep things private unless you choose to share them. That was a relief. The idea of every stray thought being broadcast was mortifying. Don't worry. Ash's voice carried warmth, almost amusement. I'm not judging you for any of it. We're all complicated inside our own heads. Even you? A pause. Then, especially me. I've had 70 years to overthink everything. You should see the mess in here. I smiled in the darkness. Good night, Ash. Good night, Isla. The weeks that followed fell into rhythm. We woke early, tended the boundary, studied Iris's journals, practiced working together with the magic. The snow piled higher, isolating us completely from the world below, but I found I didn't mind. There was something peaceful about the enforced solitude, the way it stripped life down to essentials. Ash was patient as he taught me, never frustrated when I struggled with a concept or failed to sense something he could feel clearly, and I learned quickly, my Omega nature adapting to the guardian role, as if I'd been training for it my entire life. But more than the magic, more than the duty, it was the companionship that changed me. For the first time, I had someone who truly saw me, not just through the bond, but in the small moments, the way Ash made coffee exactly how I liked it without being asked. The way he'd sense when I needed space and would go split wood or check the perimeter until I was ready for company again. The way he'd share memories from 70 years ago. making me laugh with stories about the absurd situations he'd gotten into before the binding, and I saw him too. Saw how he'd sometimes wake with nightmares of being frozen, unable to move or speak or affect anything. Saw how he'd stand at the windows for long periods, just watching the world, marveling that he could move and breathe and exist again. Saw the moments when grief would hit him. For Iris, for the life he'd lost, for the 70 years he'd never get back. In those moments, I'd reach through the bond and just be there. Not trying to fix it, not offering empty comfort, just present, solid, real. And it helped. I could feel it helping. The way my presence anchored him when the grief threatened to pull him under. One morning, 6 weeks after the binding, I woke to find Ash standing at my bedroom door. "Something's wrong," he said, his voice tight. "Can you feel it?" I reached for the mountain with my awareness and immediately sensed what he meant. A wrongness in the deep valleys, a place where the darkness was pressing against the boundary with unusual force. Not a breach yet, but close. Very close. We dressed quickly and went to the main room where we'd set up a map of the mountain. Ash pointed to a spot on the eastern slope, miles from the cabin. There. "Something's weakened the wards in that sector. We need to go reinforce them before the darkness finds the gap." It was my first real test as guardian. My first time facing the darkness directly. Fear spiked through me, but underneath it was something else. Determination. This was what I'd chosen. This was my purpose. "Let's go," I said. We geared up. Heavy coats, snowshoes, packs with supplies and the tools we'd need to repair the wards. The temperature had dropped viciously overnight, and the wind cut like knives as we left the cabin's protection. The journey took hours, fighting through chest-deep snow and brutal cold, but Ash stayed beside me the entire time. His presence threw the bond steady and reassuring. When I stumbled, he caught me. When doubt crept in, he sent waves of confidence through our connection. We found the weakened section by the feeling of wrongness that grew stronger as we approached. One of the ward trees had fallen, age and weather finally claiming it, and the gap in the boundary was like an open wound. Already I could see the darkness creeping through, shadowy tendrils that moved with unnatural purpose, seeking, testing, hungry. "We need to anchor a new ward," Ash said, pulling a knife from his pack. "I'll carve the symbols. You need to channel power into them as I work. Seal them before the darkness realizes what we're doing." I'd practiced this at the cabin, but doing it here, with the darkness pressing close and malevolent intent curling around us, was entirely different. My hands shook as I placed them on the tree Ash had chosen, feeling for the flow of magic that connected me to the mountain. "I've got you," Ash said quietly, beginning to carve. "Trust yourself. Trust the bond. You know what to do." I closed my eyes and reached deep, finding that place inside where my Omega nature lived, the part of me that could absorb and redirect, that could stand firm against pressure that would crush others. Power flowed up from the mountain, through me, into the tree as Ash carved. The symbols began to glow with pale blue light. The darkness noticed. It surged forward, testing the incomplete ward, trying to break through before we could finish. I felt its hunger crash against my awareness, cold and vast and patient. It had been waiting a long time. It could wait longer. But if it could take us now, consume the Guardians and leave the boundary undefended, terror spiked through me. The power stuttered, my concentration breaking. "Isla." Ash's voice cut through my panic, steady and sure. "I'm here. We're doing this together. You're not alone." His consciousness wrapped around mine through the bond, lending me strength, anchoring me the way I'd anchored him through his nightmares. I grabbed onto that stability and pulled the power back under control. The ward completed with a flash of light that sent the darkness recoiling. I felt it retreat, frustrated but patient, pulling back to the deep valleys to wait for the next opportunity. We stood there for a long moment, both of us breathing hard, the connection between us thrumming with shared adrenaline and relief. "You did it," Ash said, and through the bond I felt his pride, his respect. "Your first real test as guardian, and you held firm. Isla, that was incredible." I looked at him, really looked at him, seeing not just my partner in this duty but the man beneath, the one who'd held me together when I would have fallen apart. The one who made me laugh and understood my silences and never made me feel like I was too much or not enough. The one I was definitely, absolutely falling in love with. The realization should have terrified me. Instead, it settled into my chest like coming home, but I didn't say it. Not yet. We'd agreed to let anything beyond partnership develop naturally, and I would honor that. I would give him time to be sure that what he felt was real, and not just gratitude or bond-driven compulsion. Even if waiting was going to kill me,